And we continue with The Night Before Christmas by Nikolai Gogol. The devil, meanwhile, was indulging himself in earnest at Solaka's. He kissed her hand, mugging like an assessor at a priest's daughter, pressed his hand to his heart, sighed, and said straight out that if she did not agree to satisfy his passions and reward him in the customary way, he was ready for anything. He'd throw himself in water and send his soul straight to hellfire. Solaka was not so cruel, and besides, the devil, as is known, acted in cahoots with her. She did like seeing a crowd dangling after her. And she was rarely without company. However, she had thought she would spend that evening alone, because all the notable inhabitants of the village had been invited for Kutya at the deacon's, but everything turned out otherwise. The devil had just presented his demand when suddenly the voice of the stalwart headman was heard. Soloka ran to open the door, and the nimble devil got into one of the sacks lying there. The headman, after shaking the snow off the ear flaps of his hat and drinking a glass of vodka that Solaka handed him, said that he had not gone to the deacon's on account of the blizzard, and, seeing a light in her house, had stopped by intending to spend the evening with her. Before the headman finished speaking, there came a knocking at the door, and the voice of the deacon. "Hide me somewhere," the headman whispered. "I don't want to meet the deacon right now." Solaka thought for a long time where to hide such a stout guest. She finally chose the biggest sack of coal. She dumped the coal into a barrel, and the stalwart headman got into it, mustache, head, ear flaps, and all. The deacon came in, grunting and rubbing his hands, and said that none of his guests had come, and that he was heartily glad of this opportunity to sport a little at her place, and the blizzard did not frighten him. Here he came closer to her, coughed, smiled, touched her bare, plump arm with long fingers, and uttered with an air that showed both slyness and self-satisfaction, "And what have you got here, magnificent Soloka?" And having said it, he jumped back slightly. "How? What? An arm?" "Osip Nikiforovich," replied Solaka. An arm," said the deacon, heartily pleased with his beginning, and he made a tour of the room. "And what have you got here, dearest Solaka?" he uttered with the same air, having accosted her again and taken her lightly by the neck and jumping back in the same way. "As you can see, Osip Nikiforovich," replied Solaka, "a neck, and on that neck a necklace." A necklace on the neck." And the deacon made another tour of the room, rubbing his hands. "And what have you got here, incomparable Soloka?" Who knows what the deacon would have touched this time with his long fingers, but suddenly there came a knocking at the door and the voice of the Cossack Chaub. "Oh my God! An extraneous person!" the frightened deacon cried. "What now if someone of my station is found here? It'll get back to Father Kondrad." But the deacon's real apprehensions were of another sort. He feared still more that his better half might find out, who, even without that, had turned his thick braid into a very thin one with her terrible hand. "For God's sake, virtuous Solaka," he said, trembling all over, "your kindness is as it says in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 3. Knocking! By God, there's knocking! Oh, hide me somewhere." Solaka poured the coal from another sack into the barrel, and the none too voluminous deacon got in and sat down at the bottom, so that another half sack of coal could be poured on top of him. "Good evening, Solaka," said Chaub, coming in. "Maybe you weren't expecting me, eh? It's true you weren't. Maybe I'm interfering with you?" Chaub went on, putting a cheerful and significant look on his face, which let it be known beforehand that his clumsy head was toiling in preparation for cracking some sharp and ingenious joke. "Maybe you've been having fun here with somebody? Maybe you've already hidden somebody away, eh?" And delighted with this last remark, Chaub laughed, inwardly triumphant that he alone enjoyed Solaka's favors. "Well, Solaka, now give me some vodka. I think my throat got frozen in this cursed cold. What a night before Christmas God has sent us." When it struck, Solaka, do you hear when it struck? Eh? My hands are quite numb. I can't unbutton my coat. When the blizzard struck. Open up, came a voice from outside, accompanied by a shove at the door. Somebody's knocking, Chaub said, breaking off. Open up, the cry came louder than before. It's the blacksmith, said Chaub, clutching his ear flaps. Listen, Solaka, put me wherever you like. Not for anything in the world do I want to show myself to that cursed bastard. May the devil's son get himself blisters as big as haystacks under each eye. Solaka, frightened, rushed about in a panic, and forgetting herself, gestured for Chaub to get into the same sack where the deacon was already sitting. The poor deacon didn't even dare show his pain by coughing or grunting when the heavy fellow sat almost on his head and stuck his frozen boots on both sides of his temples. The blacksmith came in without saying a word or taking off his hat, and all but collapsed on the bench. He was noticeably in very low spirits. Just as Solaka was closing the door after him, someone knocked again. This was the Cossack, Severbaigas. This one could not hide in a sack because it would have been impossible to find such a sack. He was more corpulent than the headman and taller than Chaub's chum, and so Solaka led him out to the kitchen garden to hear all that he had to tell her. The blacksmith looked distractedly around the corners of the room, catching from time to time the far-resounding songs of the carolers. He finally rested his eyes on the sacks. Where are the sacks lying there? They should have been taken out long ago. I've grown all befuddled on account of this stupid love. Tomorrow's a feast day, and there's all this trash lying around the house. I must take them to the smithy. Here the blacksmith crouched down by the huge sacks, tied them tightly, and was about to haul them onto his shoulders. But it was obvious that his thoughts were wandering God knows where. Otherwise, he would have heard Chaub hiss when his hair got caught by the rope that tied the sack, and the stalwart headman began to hiccup quite audibly. Can it be that this worthless Oksana will never get out of my head, the blacksmith said. I don't want to think about her, yet I do. And as if on purpose, about nothing but her. What makes the thought come into my head against my will? Why the devil do these sacks seem heavier than before? There must be something in them besides coal. Fool that I am. I forget that everything seems heavier to me now. Before, I used to be able to bend and unbend a copper coin or a horseshoe with one hand. And now I can't lift a sack of coal. Soon the wind will knock me down. No, he cried, cheering up after a pause. What a woman I am. I won't let anybody laugh at me. Let it even be 10 sacks. I'll lift them all. And he briskly hauled sacks onto his shoulder that 2 strong men would have been unable to carry. This one, too, he went on, picking up the small one, at the bottom of which the devil lay curled up. I think I put my tools in it. Having said which, he left the house, whistling the song. No bothering with a wife for me. Noisier and noisier sounded the songs and shouts in the streets. The crowds of jostling folk were increased by these coming from neighboring villages. The lads frolicked and horsed around freely. Often amidst the carols one could hear some merry song made up on the spot by some young Cossack. Then suddenly one of the crowd, instead of a carol, would roar a New Year's song at the top of his lungs. Humpling, mumpling, give me a dumpling, a big ring of sausage, a bowl full of porridge. Loud laughter would reward the funny man. A little window would be raised, and the lean arm of an old woman. They were the only ones to stay inside now with the grave fathers. Would reach out with a sausage or a piece of pie. Lads and girls held up their sacks, trying to be the first to catch the booty. In one spot, the lads came from all sides and surrounded a group of girls. Noise, shouts, one threw a snowball, another grabbed a sack with all sorts of things in it. Elsewhere, the girls caught a lad, tripped him, and sent him flying headlong to the ground together with his sack. It seemed they were ready to make merry all night long, and the night, as if on purpose, glowed so luxuriantly, and the glistening snow made the moonlight seem whiter still. The blacksmith stopped with his sacks. He imagined he heard Oksana's voice and thin laughter in the crowd of girls. Every fiber of him twitched, flinging the sacks to the ground so that the deacon on the bottom groaned with pain, and the headman hiccuped. With his whole gullet he trudged on, the small sack on his shoulder, with the crowd of lads that was following the crowd of girls, in which he thought he heard Oksana's voice. Yes, it's she, standing like a Tsarista. Her black eyes shining, a handsome lad is telling her something. It must be funny because she's laughing. But she's always laughing, as if inadvertently, himself not knowing how. The blacksmith pushed through the crowd and stood next to her. Ah, Vakula, you're here. Good evening, said the beauty, with the very smile that all but drove Vakula out of his mind. Well, did you get a lot for your caroling, eh? Such a little sack, and the booties that the Tsaritsa wears? Did you get them? Get me the booties, and I'll marry you. She laughed and ran off with the crowd. The blacksmith stood as if rooted to the spot. No, I can't. It's more than I can bear, he said at last. But my God, why is she so devilishly pretty? Her eyes and her speech and everything, it just burns me. Burns me. No, I can't stand it anymore. It's time to put an end to it all. Perish, tiny soul. I'll go and drown myself in a hole in the ice and pass out of the picture. Here, with a resolute step, he went on, caught up with the crowd, came abreast of Oksana and said in a firm voice, Farewell, Oksana. See whether the suitor you like, fool whomever you see, whatever suitor you like, fool whomever you like, but you won't see any more of me in this world. The beauty looked surprised, wanted to say something, but the blacksmith waved his hand and ran away. Where to, Vakula? Called the lad, seeing the blacksmith running. Farewell, brothers, the blacksmith called out in reply. God willing, we'll see each other in the next world, but we're not to carouse together any more in this one. Farewell, don't remember any evil of me. Tell Father Conrad to serve a panakida for my sinful soul. I didn't paint the candles for the icons of St. Nicholas and the Mother of God. It's my fault. I got busy with worldly things. Whatever goods you find in my chest, they all go to the church. Farewell. After saying which, the blacksmith went off at a run with the sack on his back. He's cracked his head, said the lads. A lost soul, an old woman passing by mumbled piously. I'll go and tell them the blacksmith has hanged himself. And we'll pause there.